Hero, can I tell you a secret? Many rabbis I know are uncomfortable with air travel, but not for the reasons you might think. And I don't know what reasons you might think, but it's probably not this one. Many rabbis are uncomfortable with air travel because that's when we most frequently get asked, so what do you do for a living? And for the most part, I'll say, at least speaking for myself, I'm really proud of being a rabbi. However, the response that elicits is usually something along the lines of, oh, well, I don't believe in organized religion. To which I often reply, if you don't like organized religion, might I recommend Judaism? And the other thing people say is, oh, you're a rabbi. Well, I don't believe in God. I mean, if you met a dentist, would you be like, I don't believe in brushing. I don't believe in organized dentistry. I feel like as long as I'm walking around with fresh breath, that's enough for me. But for me, this raises a larger question, especially in Judaism. Is there a place in Judaism, in the Jewish people, for skeptics, for rational people? Does not believing in God, or at least not in the God that you were taught to believe in as a child, preclude you from sacred space, from communal space? Is there a place for rational, skeptical people in what is nominally a religious setting? Is there a place in Judaism for people for whom the Big Bang and evolution make more sense than, say, chapter 1 of the Bible? Is there room for people who don't believe in God?
There are some people out there in the Jewish world or across other religions where, sure, they can go, they can say the words of the prayer. If they don't believe them or they're not sure they believe them, it doesn't matter. But for people like me and people who are drawn to humanistic Judaism, it does matter that you believe the words you're saying. And so my experiences led me to a movement in Judaism that was especially appropriate for somebody who wanted to believe what they say and say what they believe.
Today we are talking to a rabbi who leads communities in the Humanistic Judaism movement, covering such topics as what it's like being both skeptical and spiritual, ways in which online community can be better than community IRL or in real life, and what's Jewish about childbirth. Right after this bass. Welcome to the Jewcurious Show, where learning about Judaism and getting to know Jewish people can help you live a life of meaning, joy, human connection, and personal growth. And now your host, Rabbi John Carrier. Thank you, Ron, for that dulcet introduction. Thank you, Joey Weissenberg and the Hadar Ensemble, for those opening beats. And most of all, thank you, Hero, for tuning in once again to the Jewcurious Show. Today's show was a real treat for me to record, a wonderful conversation. I hope it's going to be a treat for you, but not treat like, having no nutritional value, because it's, in some ways it's like vegetables. It's good for you. It is part of this balanced diet of learning about Judaism and about the Jewish people. And when I say balance, we have had a fair number of different kinds of people on this show, a fair number of rabbis, not just rabbis, but a lot of rabbis. I'm going to admit, it's, I know a lot of rabbis. Not bragging, but we've had a lot of conservative rabbis. We've had reform rabbis. We've had reconstructionist or reconstructing rabbis. We've had an Orthodox rabbi on this show, Rabbi Mark Wilds of the Manhattan Jewish Experience. And today, for the first time, we are talking to a humanistic rabbi. And this conversation was a really special one for me. I know there are people listening to this show who are considering converting to Judaism, or they're studying, or they're on the path somewhere. And I know when I was on that path, I had a very particular problem, one that I thought was going to be a deal breaker. And that is, at the time that I committed to joining the Jewish people, I did not believe in God. In fact, I took a whole year-long course. I learned all the holidays. I learned all about the Jewish people, all about Jewish philosophy, history, Torah, mitzvot. And at the end of it, somebody close to me said, so what are you going to do now? And And I paused. I said, look, I love everything about this. This makes so much more sense to me personally than the tradition that I grew up with. I just have this one problem. I don't believe in God. And this person who was and is a Jewish person from birth leaned in and said, that's okay. A lot of us don't. And that's when I first thought it might be possible for me to be a part of this people. Now, in case you're freaking out a little bit, or if this doesn't sound like the John you know who talks about God quite a bit, my answer is a little bit different now on that front. In fact, I'll say my ideas on that are a lot different now. But what's important is that I wouldn't be Jewish today. I wouldn't be teaching what I'm teaching today. Certainly wouldn't have a podcast about it, had not the door been held open for me, and that's the door marked Jewish, but skeptical. If you've ever heard that expression, oh, I am spiritual but not religious, I think for me, for a long time, I was the exact opposite of that. I was always very religious. I like to show up to stuff, do the things, perform the rituals, do the readings, and I love doing it without having a real sense of a spiritual connection, because that's not what it was about for me. It was about being with the people. It was about doing the learning, about helping others more than it was about my personal connection with God. And it was a powerful realization for me that there has always been room within the Jewish community for that kind of skepticism. And Hero, especially if this is you, if there's something that's attractive to you about Judaism, if you enjoy participating in a Jewish community, but you feel like everybody's on sort of this God train and you're not, and you feel weird or left out, just know that you're in good company. And today we are going to talk to a leader dedicated to this kind of Jewish connection. But before we do, I just want to do a couple of things. One is ask you a question, and then after that, I will make a suggestion, and then we will jump into a fascinating conversation with Rabbi Denise Handlarski. First, the question. How's this working for you? I mean, we've had a few episodes of this podcast now, had a couple of breaks here and there. Now we're back on track. I'm certainly having the time of my life. And I've gotten to talk to a lot of great people that I might not have taken the chance to talk to otherwise. But I want to know how it's working for you. And the best way you can let me know is go to iTunes, look up the Jewcurious show on iTunes, and leave us a rating. And if you're generous, leave us a review. You can just give us 1 to 5 stars. And I'm really looking for honest feedback here. Don't just float my boat, whatever that means. But give us a star rating, and if you want to take an extra 10, 15 seconds, write down your thoughts about the show. Let us know what impact it's making on your life, if any, what you like about the show, what you think we can improve on. That would be super helpful. For me, any feedback is valuable as long as it is honest, sincere feedback, and I really want to hear from you. Really want to know that we're on the right track, because I'm still learning how to share Torah in this way, and any improvement would not just help me, it would help other listeners to the show, and God willing, help you as well, Hero. So that's the question. How's this podcast working out for you? Love to hear your thoughts on that. And finally, before we get started, I just want to throw a suggestion at you by way of letting you know I am back in the saddle on YouTube. That is, just this past week, we have launched the 30-day Jewish Learning Challenge. That is 30 videos in 30 days on the topic of Jewish learning, why it's not only important, but beneficial for you, how it can actually help you in your daily life, help you develop a spiritual practice, help you develop a social community, help you become more self-aware and attuned to your own personal growth. As of this recording, we're about 3 days into it with 27 days to go. If you don't want to miss a single one, what I suggest you do is go to jewcurious.show/learning. That's jewcurious.show/LEARNING. That spells learning. And get connected to this 30-day challenge. And once you do that, every single day in your inbox, first thing in the morning, first thing when you wake up, if you like to look at your email first thing when you wake up, I know some people say that's a bad habit, and yet I do it all the time. In your email box, first thing in the morning, you will have a link to a new video, and you'll get a link a day for 30 days and tune into the opportunities that you have for Jewish learning There's a lot of step-by-step in there on how to get connected to a rabbi, how to get connected to a study partner, what to study on a daily basis if you're just now getting into it, and then how to upgrade that and take it to the next level. So that's my question. How are we doing? That's my suggestion. Join us in this challenge, and I'll throw that link at you back again at the end of the show. But for now, I can't wait to dive into this incredible, insightful, generous conversation with Rabbi Denise Handlarski. Here we go. Coming to the microphone, I am very excited to welcome to the Jewcurious show, Rabbi Denise Handlarski. Rabbi Denise Handlarski is the leader of the community secularsynagogue.com. She's also the leader of not a virtual, but an IRL congregation called Arenu in Toronto, and also provides a service that you can find at jewishdoula.ca. And she informs me that is exactly what it sounds like. So we'll talk about that more in a minute. But first, Rabbi Denise, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to speak with you.
I have encountered in my rabbinic education and journey a group of rabbis that we don't hear from a lot, and that's rabbis and Jews from the, I don't know how you would define it, sort of the Humanistic Judaism movement. And I want to hear more about that because I don't hear enough about that to even ask you the right questions. So tell me what Humanistic Judaism is.
Sure. So I was ordained as a rabbi through the Humanistic Jewish movement. Essentially, the movement itself started around 50 years ago by a rabbi named Sherwin Wine, who was a Reform rabbi, and essentially decided to begin a community for people who, like him, found Jewish practice and learning and community very meaningful, but didn't actually find Jewish prayer meaningful. So the movement has expanded and grown. We have communities throughout North America, the world, many active rabbis in Israel as well. In North America, our congregations have tended to follow a sort of congregational model, although now you'll find more havarot and things of that nature. So my congregation, Orenu congregation, is one of those. We have about 140 families and an active Sunday school, and we do all the kinds of things you would expect a Jewish congregation to do. High holiday programs, other kinds of holiday programs, adult ed, children's ed, social justice work, all different sorts of things that you can take advantage of by being part of the community. We have a cemetery section that we allow people to purchase plots through us. The change from a traditional Jewish space there is that we are very welcoming of intermarried people. And so it allows intermarried couples to be buried beside each other, or people can choose cremation in our Jewish section. So we do things that are traditional, and we do things a little bit differently. So you'll never find a prayer service. We don't have a common siddur or prayer book in our congregations. We're using human-centered or earth-centered poetry, some adapted liturgy. We create our own service material, and that's what we do in our context.
So I'm interested in this path because it sounds like on the one hand, it gravitates toward many things that are very traditionally Jewish, but I don't want to say missing a piece, but not containing something that is a traditional part of Jewish getting together, prayer, God language, and things like that. So I'm wondering how you get there. And was there anything, let's say, in your childhood, or were you raised, what kind of Jewish upbringing did you have, and how did you respond to it that maybe kind of spells out how you got where you are right now?
When I was a child, I was raised by parents who were not raised in North America. My parents grew up in South Africa and Israel, respectively, where they were very strongly Jewish in their home, but the only synagogue they could attend was Orthodox. And so they were non-Orthodox people attending Orthodox synagogues. So we moved to Toronto. I live in Canada, and they didn't have a spiritual home here. We bounced around between different kinds of communities. Nothing felt right to them. So I got exposed to a lot of different ways of being Jewish, and that was foundational. Another thing that was foundational from childhood has nothing to do with being Jewish, but I tell the story often in terms of how I became a humanistic Jew. Synonyms for that are like a secular Jew or a skeptical Jew or a spiritual but not really religious Jew, things like that. And so when I was a child, I had lost a tooth, and my parents told me there was such a thing as the tooth fairy. And if I put the tooth under my pillow, the tooth fairy would take it and turn it into a star. And in exchange, I would get some money. And I remember thinking, that story is ridiculous. And there's absolutely no way a fairy is coming into my room and taking my tooth. And so, but they liked to promote the kind of magic of childhood a lot of people want their kids to have. I was very skeptical and sort of serious, I guess, as a child in nature. And so I designed a ruse. I told them that I had lost the tooth, and they tried to console me and said, don't worry, the tooth fairy will be able to find it no matter where it is. And so sure enough, I had hidden the tooth away, and they told me the tooth fairy came and took the tooth, and I had received some money in exchange. And then I produced the tooth and said, haha, there's no such thing as a tooth fairy. And I think that orientation in me led to kind of humanistic Judaism, because I was experiencing different forms of Judaism, going to different sorts of services, meeting different communities. And I was quite serious about it. I hung out with some Hasidic Jews quite a lot when I was a young teenager. And I found it quite attractive and charming. But there was still that part of me that was a little skeptical and thought, I have to really believe it for me to do it. I think that there are some people out there in the Jewish world or across other religions where, sure, they can go, they can say the words of the prayer. If they don't believe them or they're not sure they believe them, it doesn't matter. But for people like me and people who are drawn to humanistic Judaism, it does matter that you believe the words you're saying. And so my experiences led me to a movement in Judaism that was especially appropriate for somebody who wanted to believe what they say and say what they believe.
So I'm just really resonating with this story, almost by contrast, I'll say, because when I remember my own childhood about my feelings about such magical characters as the Tooth Fairy, and not raised in a Jewish home, Santa, as in the Claus Man himself. And so,
yes, I've heard of him.
I remember. That's right. He looks kind of like a Lubavitcher Rebbe, only the suit is red instead of black. I remember having this experience or having this thought that, and I don't know what age it was. I'm going to guess somewhere in the 7 to 9 range, that I don't believe in this stuff anymore. I can't believe in this stuff anymore. It just didn't seem rational to me. However, I made a kind of a gamble. I said, if I appear to believe in this stuff, I keep getting money for teeth, right? Having this fear that if I professed heresy about Santa Claus, that somehow the quantity and quality of my presence would change. And so there was this age of cognitive dissonance, and I'm coming clean here. Sorry, Mom and Dad, if you listen to the show, that I pretended to believe in things that other people believed or people thought I would believe for stuff. But that also makes me think that there are people who kind of cop to the tradition or believe or play along with certain aspects of belief because they like the other things that come with it, whether that's social acceptance, social rewards, actual quarters for teeth. And as a parent, I am fighting tooth fairy inflation. None of this $20 bill stuff. It's quarters or nothing. But I'll say that for some people, you can either say, well, I'm going to go along with this because I like the other aspects of what I'm doing. And what I like about what you're saying is that there are people for whom that cognitive dissonance that just feels inauthentic, right? I like being with Jewish people.
Right.
I have a value that I want to be, God forbid, someday, happens to all of us, buried with Jewish people. But where that happens is in contexts that are inconsistent with what I feel like inside. And is there a space for me?
Exactly.
So I really love that you're doing this work in the world, and I want to understand it better myself and help my audience understand it. Can I
respond to what you said with two quick things?
Sure.
So the two things are, number one, I think that a lot of people in the past, before there was such a thing as secular humanistic Judaism as a movement or congregations or spaces where you could do that, would do exactly what you're describing. They would go to a synagogue because there was nowhere else you could go to express your Jewish identity and be in Jewish community. And if it didn't feel quite right, it was still worth the trade-off. I think that that's still a choice some people make, and that's okay if that works for you. What I know about the way society has changed, though, is that sense of authenticity. And this is number two. That sense of authenticity, I think, is increasingly important to people. And so I think there are more and more people who wouldn't make that trade-off, who wouldn't say, I care about the tooth fairy quarters enough to go along with this thing that I'm not sure I believe in. And so what I feel really proud of in secular humanistic Judaism isn't that we have taken people out of traditional communities and brought them into ours. What I feel proud of is that we make space for people who would be nowhere without our communities. And I think that in particular, in our contemporary moment, that's very important.
Right. I love this. And I want to point this out. If any, leaders of traditional synagogues, or, how do I say this? Sort of average synagogues, middle of the road, cis synagogues, perhaps. Leaders of many synagogues may be concerned that, okay, this is going to take away from our community. But what you're pointing out is that, no, this is for people who have already opted out, who have come into traditional prayer spaces and says, I love the old joke where, Schwartz and Cohen go to the synagogue and everybody knows that Cohen goes to the synagogue to talk to God and Schwartz goes to the synagogue to talk to Cohen, right? There's has always been that division among us of people who connect to the religious aspect and people who connect to, say, the cultural and social aspect more, but they both belong in the same building. In our moment, and maybe it's not just our moment, there are people who have decided against going to the synagogue at all. They would love to talk to Cohen, as it were, but the experience is so dissonant for them that it feels inauthentic. And in this time and place of choice in personal expression, they're just not going because they don't want to fake it till they make it, say. And so maybe and have felt the loss of having a Jewish community, period, if they couldn't feel comfortable in that space.
Right. And isn't it so much richer if you can talk to Cohen and also get something out of the liturgy you are experiencing and also believe the stuff that the rabbi's saying and find it pertinent to your life? So there are many ways in which I think it works. We serve people who on Jewish surveys, and some of your listeners might be familiar with, the 2013 Pew Report. More recent surveys also indicate many, many Jews identify as culturally Jewish, not religiously Jewish, or consider themselves spiritual but not religious, or call themselves secular Jews, atheist Jews, agnostic Jews, such a range of people, not to mention all of the people who unfortunately were driven out of Jewish life and practice, even if they wanted to go have that conversation between Schwartz and Cohen. If one of them was married to somebody with a less Jewish sounding name, they may not be so welcome at the synagogue anymore. And so those connections were broken in that way too. So to me, my work in the Jewish world, the movement and also the work we do in our individual communities, in all kinds of secular Jewish communities that are coming up, is really making space to welcome people back to Jewish community, to say like, hey, this is Schwartz. Maybe you want to have a conversation, but also everybody is welcome. And we don't have to feel like the bad Jew sitting in the pew. That was how I often felt when I was young and I would go to traditional places. I felt like I can't tell anybody that I don't keep kosher, that I kind of, that I'll eat bacon, or that I will, do a lot of un-Jewish things with my friends, like go dancing or whatever I was up to. And I felt like I couldn't be my whole authentic self and be welcome in Jewish spaces. And what I want is for everybody to feel like wherever you go, if that's a more traditional community, that's wonderful. If you can feel like your whole authentic self there, because as you're trying to access that part of you that's seeking spiritual nourishment or communal connection or tapping into a sense of identity that is really profound and meaningful for you, if you can't do that, bringing your whole authentic self, I think that's really actually harmful for people, as opposed to our Jewish spaces being healing and nurturing and holistic for people.
Well, I want to pause to acknowledge a great personal anger, because I've just heard one of my trigger phrases, which is bad Jew. And I think you hit on this correctly. I'll say, as a rabbi, like, the worst thing in the world for me to hear is somebody say, I'm a bad Jew. And it's usually in the context of, I would be promoting something at my synagogue, or saying, are you coming to this? Or do you have plans for this holiday? Just to kind of engage people in conversation, not to put pressure on them necessarily, but just say, oh, are you doing this? Are you doing that? And they say, no, Rabbi, I'm a bad Jew. Like, we've got pay-per-view boxing on Friday night, so we're not doing that. I'm a bad Jew. And now I just routinely just stop people. I say, like, look, no. Are you familiar with the case of Bernie Madoff? The guy who engineered a Ponzi scheme and fleeced charities out of billions and did all sorts of horrible stuff. For me, that's a bad Jew. Right? Everybody, and look, I'm sure he has, redeeming qualities and has worked on his tshuva. But basically, for me, anybody north of Bernie Madoff is just fine. And because I think people internalize that narrative of, I don't do all the things that a good Jew is supposed to do, so that must make me somehow deficient. And then
exactly,
I feel less equipped to go into those spaces that could actually help me grow and actually help me connect with people.
Yeah. So these are the conversations I have. So in addition to my work at the Orenu congregation, which is, as you said, an IRL congregation, we meet in the Toronto area in person. I also launched recently secularsynagogue.com, because I want to reach people who aren't in the Toronto area, for people who might live in smaller places without a humanistic Jewish congregation, or people for whom an online expression of Judaism will work for them. I have very young kids. I know you're a parent too. Mm-hmm. And it's hard for me to make it out to stuff. So if I can do stuff online, that will actually be a much better way for me to connect often. You don't get everything you get in person, but there are things that happen online that you don't get in real life too. So I see it as a good trade-off. Anyway, part of the conversation I had with people when we launched secularsynagogue.com is exactly what you're talking about. That many of us grew up with this bad Jew guilt. And I said exactly what you say. To me, the purpose of doing Jewish, however you do Jewish, and even if it's sporadic and not very often, but if you're doing Jewish at all, a Passover Seder, lighting Hanukkah candles, any kind of time you engage with a Jewish story, anything you teach to your kids about being Jewish, whatever you're doing that's Jewish, if you're doing it for the sake of doing it, frankly, it's not that meaningful. If you're doing it because it will promote some kind of goodness for you, goodness for your kids, makes you feel good, connects you with the part of yourself that feels deep and precious, adds meaning to your life, or doing good in the world, if you feel your Jewish ethics compel you to engage in tzedakah, which is charity, or justice. So if it's doing good for you or doing good for the world, then that's good. That's a reason to do Jewish. And it doesn't matter how much Jewish you do. If you're not a good person, and I might say that my standard is just that much more strict than Bernie Madoff.
Okay.
But I want people to be good people and do good in the world. I think it feels good to feel like you're a good person and doing good in the world. And I care about justice. To me, that's the whole reason to do Jewish at all. And so that bad Jew guilt is destructive, not only for the people who are prevented from coming to Jewish spaces and doing Jewish because of that guilt, but it's bad for everybody. Because if we could just say, it's all about being a good person, just being a good person makes you a good Jew, then not only does that benefit the Jews, it benefits everybody who's touched by all the good we could do if we used what's awesome in our tradition. It's not all awesome, but some of it is awesome and compels us to do good things. Why not harness that and make a difference in the world?
I love hearing this. I have to confess that there's another phrase that I hear a lot, and that's good person. And so I usually hear it in the context of, to go back to the Pew Report, that same kind of survey identifies that 97% of Jews who are asked whether they're proud to be Jewish say yes. right? Which, as a recovering economist, I can say that means statistically everybody. And like the 3% of people who aren't proud, they just had like indigestion that day that they were asked. So people feel good about being Jewish, and yet a fraction of those people, like 30%, belong to synagogues at some point in their life. And 10% of them attend a synagogue on a regular basis, right? So what's going on with everybody else? And a lot of everybody else say, well, I'm proud to be Jewish. I don't need to do all the things. I don't need to light Shabbat candles. I don't need to pay synagogue membership fees. I don't need to go to all these holidays, take off work for Shmini Atzeret, whatever that is. What counts is that I'm a good person. And I have a hard time disagreeing with that because I'm very agreeable to the idea of being a good person. But I have to ask, for somebody who feels, let's say, good enough at being a good person, what do these Jewish traditions add to that? Like, what do they, if your religion is the religion of the good person, what are you missing when you opt out of other Jewish traditions?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you, although I will say that I think that if being a good person and that makes you proud to be Jewish, or if you're proud to be Jewish and you feel like you're a good person and that's enough, that's okay with me, actually. I think that we have, to me, it goes along with the conversation about bad Jew guilt. We have a lot of people in the Jewish world. I'm not talking about you. I think that you're very open and welcoming of a diverse kind of person looking for a diverse kind of experience. But a lot of people get that spiel and then they think like, oh, so I should feel guilty if I'm not part of a Jewish community. I should feel bad if I'm not doing more. And actually, that's not how I view it at all. If you're good, if you're doing good in the world and you're happy and doing more Jewish stuff isn't going to add value to your life, then, go in peace. That's okay with me. I think that there are a lot of people who are searching for something to do that's Jewish, that feels authentic. I think the reason they're not going to synagogue and they're not doing more that's Jewish is that the options that have been shown to them throughout their life are not meaningful for them, are boring, are in Hebrew, a language most of them don't speak or understand and certainly can't read, are led by leaders whom they don't trust and with whom they don't relate. And so I'm not at all surprised that they feel like they're a good person. They're proud to be Jewish, but they don't do anything Jewish. I think we need more options. And so when people find me, one of my communities, whether that's Orenu in Toronto or people who more recently have found secularsynagogue.com, I hear all the time, I wish this had been around earlier. When wedding couples hire me or colleagues in the humanistic Jewish movement to do their weddings, whether they're, Jewish couples or intermarrying couples whom we have always served without barrier or judgment, we hear, I wish I had known about this kind of Judaism before. I wish this had been part of my life. And so what I see is not a problem in the Jewish world or the religious world where, the people who are good people aren't coming to our stuff and they're happy. And that's the problem. What I think is the problem is people who are yearning for something meaningful, whose lives feel very, I'm not saying people lead empty, shallow lives. I think we lead busy, lonely lives often. And we're looking for meaningful connection and depth. And for many of us, it would be nice if that could be expressed Jewishly because we're proud to be Jewish. But where in our communities am I going to find it? As myself, as an example, I was searching. I was a teenager. I was longing for something that added meaning to my life. I was proud to be Jewish. And I would go to these Chabad events and witness, frankly, horrific sexism. I'm not speaking about everybody in Chabad. I know there's good Jewish feminism going on there. But what I saw made me feel like as a woman, I couldn't fully participate and I wouldn't be respected. So that didn't work for me. I found a lot of things in other kinds of synagogue spaces, as I said, boring, not meaningful, in Hebrew. I wasn't connecting. And so for a while, I was one of those people who felt proud to be Jewish, happy reasonably in my life and feeling like I'm a good person, but something was missing. And if I hadn't found a type of Judaism where I could be my authentic self, that would 100% still be me. I would much rather just be a good person and be proud to be Jewish and do a couple things than go to places where I felt like the bad Jew.
I love this opening up of a kind of third path that I think describes something that we're not really describing in conversations about Jewish organizational structure, Jewish leadership. I'll confess that as a rabbi, and I've observed this in rabbis and lay leaders, sometimes you look at those people who don't come to your synagogue and you're thinking, well, they have, if they're not doing Jewish like I do Jewish, meaning join a synagogue, come to services, go to things, then that's some sort of deficiency on their part. Like and our job is to show them what they're missing, right? And we go out and say, this is how we do Jewish, and you're missing this right now. And the truth is that for a lot of people, that's not the problem they're looking to solve. And when we say, okay, if they're not responding if they're not saying, oh, you have this service, you have this childhood program, you have whatever, it's not that they're not coming because they're missing that, or they're missing what we do and they don't know about it yet. And it's not that they're going about their business happy with their lives without it. The problem that a lot of people are trying to solve is that meaning and connection problem. They still have that job that needs to get done, but they go into some synagogue spaces, and what's on offer that's supposed to do that job isn't doing the job for them. And so
exactly
what you're talking about is creating a path for meeting that need of meaning, connection, stimulation. We'll say, like, let's have a fun time. Let's have an intellectually challenging time. I'm not finding that in certain synagogues, but I might find that at secularsynagogue.com. So if I go to this website, and I'll put a link in the show notes, what can I expect to find? What is an online secular Jewish community like?
Okay, so the website itself is not where you're going to find a ton of stuff, but it will give you the pathways to find some stuff. So the website itself will give you access to a free guide called Change the World from the Comfort of Your Couch. As I mentioned, I really want to be able to have people for whom it's hard to get out, whether they're parents, whether they're older or ill, or whether, honestly, after a whole day of working really hard, you just want to hang out and maybe watch Netflix. Maybe you do a little Jewish during that time too. So you get that guide, Change the World from the Comfort of Your Couch. And secularsynagogue.com is an online virtual community. Right now, we have 40 people who are part of it. And we mainly use a closed Facebook group as our platform for doing Jewish. So people who joined when we launched over the high holidays have been in that group doing some text study together. This week, we spoke a lot about Jewish approaches to understanding gender and trans inclusion. We talk a lot, there was somebody in the group who got married recently. And so we talked all about intermarriage. She was intermarrying, and so many people in the group are intermarried. We shared stuff about our lives and how we make that work and how that has brought meaning to our lives. So these are just a few of examples of what's going on in the group, but we're using the closed Facebook group for that. So that's one part of it. Members of secularsynagogue.com also get access to a part of the website that's protected by a password. And there you would find all the kinds of things that I think you're talking about, where I'm interested in what problem they're trying to solve in their lives. And I want to give them resources. So you don't want to come to a congregational Shabbat, that's fine. There's a DIY Shabbat guide on there. There's stuff there about things you can do with kids and parenting resources. There's stuff there about different kinds of holidays and ways that you can bring in more traditional elements if you want to. I include traditional prayers for people who want to see them and know what they say. And I include secular versions for people who want that as an option. So my goal is that people get to Jew it their way. That's how I've been framing it. Pick the parts that are meaningful to you and do that. So that's what secularsynagogue.com is all about. It does mainly serve people who are, as I said, secular cultural Jews, spiritual but not religious. A lot of people call themselves Jewish. We have people in there who aren't Jewish at all, but are married to somebody who's Jewish or have another kind of Jewish connection. And so it's actually for anybody who wants to do Jewish stuff with Jewish people, whether they're Jewish themselves. And because I think the people who are attracted to it tend to be creative and smart and interesting. The conversations in the group are amazing. So it's been a beautiful project. As I said, we just launched in September. So I told the people who joined, you're co-creating it with me. This isn't a top-down thing. This is like we're all figuring out what we need and how to make it happen. And so it's changing all the time with new resources all the time. And it's really exciting.
That is incredibly exciting. I love this kind of bottom-up DIY co-created community that you're building. And what I'm curious about on your behalf is, in building this community, what have you learned?
I'm learning all the time. In addition to learning like how to build an online business, that's been a whole part of it. But one thing that I've learned, I think, is that it's a different kind of relationship when the rabbi and the people in the community can talk informally all the time. So my congregants at Arenu, I like to think I have a close relationship with many congregants, particularly people who are really involved and, put themselves in our space. Often, like, I interact with them often. I know about their lives. They know about my lives. They've met my kids. We are really in a beautiful community together. But it can be several weeks before I speak to them in some cases. Whereas in secularsynagogue.com, I'm chatting with people all the time. And that kind of closeness of relationship is something I haven't experienced before. And I didn't realize I was missing. And I've heard from some of the people in the group that just knowing that your rabbi is, direct message away, or they can post a question in the group and it will be answered that day. And then everybody can learn from that and discuss it. That immediacy and intimacy, I think, has been really powerful and transformative.
That's wonderful. And this is something that I'm learning a lot about too, as people are kind of gathering around this show. Thank God we've got our own Facebook group, the Jewcurious Community Center. It's not your old school JCC, but it is JCC, which coincidentally are my initials as well. Can't take credit for that. That was my parents. But as I'm seeing this coalesce, I'm intensely curious about online community as community. And I know there's a lot of resistance in again, I use this word loosely, the traditional Jewish synagogue model about moving into online spaces. And some of the resistance is, well, it's just not the same. It's just not a community that you can build. And looking at the difference between what's been called sort of synchronous versus asynchronous. There's a value to being with a person in a time and place at the same time and place that is missing from, say, asynchronous communication. Like, the most extreme example is Reddit, right? Or like a bulletin board where somebody puts a message out there and then a week later somebody else puts a message out there. And there's a back and forth, but it's not the same as two people arguing over a cup of coffee, right? It's not My Dinner with Andre. One of my favorite movies, everybody, by the way. It's another dark confession of mine. And my wife is still mad for making me, or for my making her watch that with me. But so they're like, you can't hug people online, right? You don't have those people with you. And what I'm noticing, and I think what you've really called out in a way that I haven't seen before, is that there's also something to that asynchronous that is missing from the synchronous. There's something,
right?
It's not the same, but there's almost something better about that kind of online back and forth, that even if you're not in the same place at the same time, there's a continuity that the same place time lacks.
Right.
I know rabbis who love their congregants and can't possibly meet with them as often as they would like to, in the sense that even the most, earnest about getting out there and meeting people and being one-on-one rabbi, by the nature of the job and just the scheduling and all this stuff, winds up being the Wizard of Oz, right? Like, nobody sees the wizard, not nobody, not know how, just because of the confines of time and space. But if you can be on a forum where, like, I might not be there in that moment, but I might be here 5 minutes from now when you're gone, doing the dishes, or you're gone picking somebody up or whatever. And then I can respond to that. And then that conversation can go on. And
exactly.
For anybody out there kind of delegitimizing that asynchronous conversation, I hate to tell you, but that's going to spoil the Talmud for you. That's going to spoil so much of Jewish learning that is about a conversation starting in the Torah that gets picked up like 1,000 years later in the Mishnah. And on the same page is commented on several hundred years later by the Talmud, followed by Rashi, 500 years after that, and his grandchildren 100 years after that. And on the same page, you have this kind of ongoing conversation that can be just as heatedly abusive or just as reverent and loving as two people in the room together at the same time.
Exactly. And I see that as part of the wisdom of Judaism is being able to create conversation across generations and across vast distances. And that's how Judaism has maintained itself. So I think you're exactly right in what you described. There are things you get in in-person communities and in-person interactions that you don't get online. And there are things you get online that you don't get in in-person congregations and interactions. And particularly, as I said, because of the differences in generation, which secularsynagogue.com has, and differences across distance. So I started this, from my living room in Toronto, and I have people joining me for conversations who are currently in France, in Portugal, in Australia, all over the US. Like, there's no way these people would ever come to my congregation in Toronto and ever have a chance to share their awesome ideas.
Well, I love this conversation that we're having, and I'm going to pivot it a little bit to focus specifically on some people out there who I think are listening to the show. And I'm going to start with this group of people because I think it really speaks to a lot of the people that are coming into your community, and that's Jewish people who've been Jewish their whole lives, but maybe haven't been to a synagogue ever or in a while for some of the reasons that you've talked about. And what I want to ask you is if there was a person out there who was walking down the street and looked up and saw a billboard, and that billboard could speak to them in some way, and they didn't know this, but you got the billboard for the day, what's one thing that you would want that person to know who is Jewish but is not really feeling connected? What's something you would want them to know?
I would want them to know that there's goodness in them and they can make a difference. So what I would put on the billboard might be something like, you're good and you can do good. So
you're not making, I'll just call this, you're not making a pitch for your building. You're not making a pitch for your website. Like it doesn't sound like you're even making a pitch for Judaism per se.
I'm terrible at marketing. I'll just acknowledge that because that's not what it's about for me. What it's about for me truly is two-directional goodness, making your life better. And when your life is better, when you're better, you can do more good in the world. That's my whole reason for being and doing Jewish and the whole reason for my rabbinate. And so if people go out there and feel like they're good people and do good in the world, that is serving my mission much better than saying, hey, check out secularsynagogue.com. Of course, I think if you come to secularsynagogue.com, it will help you be and do good, but that's not the main purpose of it all for me.
Right. I love this. This reminds me of a teaching that I think I got from Rabbi Brad Hirschfield, who I believe got it from Yitz Greenberg. And I could be misquoting all of that chain of tradition, but here goes. And that's that the purpose of Judaism isn't to make people more Jewish. The purpose of Judaism is to make people more human.
Right.
Right. Or rather, maybe I misstated it. It's not to make you, the purpose of doing Jewish stuff isn't to make you a better Jew. It's to make you a better human being. And I think
that's certainly a humanistic Jewish way of looking at it, for sure.
I think that's exactly what I'm hearing from what you're saying. Now, different crowd of people who are listening to the show often are in the process of converting to Judaism, becoming Jewish, or maybe they just did. If you cross paths with somebody who was on their way to the Beit Din, they were about to dip in the mikveh, they were about to become Jewish, what advice would you have for that person on that day?
Well, I would say to them that the fact that you're going to a Beit Din and dipping in a mikveh means you've jumped through a lot of hoops to get here. And now that you're a Jew, figure out how to Jew it your way. Figure out what's meaningful to you, what will add value to your life, what feels authentic to you, and do that. I would say, don't worry about following the rules. Figure out what will help you live a Jewish life that's purposeful and beautiful for you.
Now, I just want to add one caveat to that in case you've aroused any anxiety. I've never seen actual hoops. These hoops that we're talking about are purely metaphorical and significant and real. There's a lot of steps in that process and a lot of challenges to overcome. Your Beit Din may vary, but mine doesn't use hoops. So if you have a hoop at the same time, I think Rabbi Denise's message is on point. Is there one thing that you would want people who aren't Jewish to know about Judaism or about the Jewish people?
I guess due to a recent uptick in anti-Semitic expression, when you ask that question, I'm sadly kind of moved to say something like, Jews are cool. Like, don't fear us and don't hate us. And certainly please don't target us. That they're very nice Jews living near you and have a conversation with them. So it's too bad that that's what comes to my mind. So I'm going to take the opportunity to answer it in two ways if I can. What I really think is important for people to know about Jews, assuming the majority of people don't need to hear that anti-Semitic talk. What I think is important to know about Jews and Judaism is that it is complicated, full of contradictions, religion and culture that has meant different things to different people. There's no one Judaism. There's no one way to be Jewish. And so for people who are not Jewish, I think that's often something they don't realize. I know that people see, a story in the newspaper about Jews in Israel or about a Chabad community or about Jews doing something, and they think that applies to everybody. So I think I would just say that the thing that I like best about Judaism is that there are so many Judaisms.
I think the seasonal archetype that comes to mind, and I've seen a few of my rabbi friends post this, and non-rabbi friends, I do have non-rabbi friends, everybody, is that, hey, dentists know a lot of dentists. What am I going to say? People are posting pictures of going to like a Halloween store and seeing a packaged costume that says rabbi on it. And that rabbi looks a certain way. And maybe I'll put a picture of it in the show notes for hilarity's sake, not for the sake of promotion. But that rabbi looks like it has a certain archetype. It has a big black hat and a big long beard that you either use with adhesive or an elastic band, has a certain color of suit, and has what's funny for me, it has a type of prayer shawl that you would never see that kind of rabbi wear.
Well, it's not just Halloween, although I do want to see that photo. I don't know if you've ever done a Google image search of the word rabbi, but you're going to have to click through a lot of stuff before you find a rabbi who looks anything like me, regardless of how what my particular features are. Even when people think of the word rabbi, they don't think of women still. Like we still really have an image problem that way.
Right. And I'll just clarify, by my estimation, that the percentage of Jewish people, and I'll say the percentage of rabbis, like the percentage of rabbis who look like the first page or so of results of the Google image search for rabbis is, I'm going to hazard somewhere between 5 and 10%.
Yeah.
Right. And that's because it's excluding all rabbis who are women. It's excluding all rabbis such as myself, who have been, who follow halachic shaving practices, but have been forbidden by spouses to grow a long beard, because my beard comes in white, whiter than my father-in-law's beard. So I can't grow that beard. I look like my wife's grandpa. It's verboten, and I follow, Shalom Bayit. Keeping peace in the home. So
it's a more important Jewish value for sure.
Right. And but my point is not my own personal facial hair. Again, I made this about me. But it's this idea that when we think of a rabbi, we think of an image of a rabbi that represents approximately 10% of rabbis worldwide, we'll say. Maybe 15 in some countries, or it could be a lot in some countries, but that's not necessarily what a rabbi looks like. That's not necessarily what a Jewish person looks like. And yet that's what we see. We've talked about secular synagogue. We've talked about a little bit about a Reinu. Tell me about Jewish doula.
Okay. So Jewish doula so for anyone who doesn't know what a doula is, just a normal, regular doula.
We'll start there.
So a doula is somebody who supports a person in pregnancy, labor, birth. Some people are postpartum doulas also and may help you with some caring for baby or household tasks or some stuff after the birth. But I'm a labor and birth doula. So what that means is that I trained through an organization, it's called Doula Canada in my case, to help you make decisions regarding what you'd like to have happen at the time of your birth, whether you're planning to do it at home or in the hospital, whether you want medication or not, helping with some meditation or affirmations or other kinds of things to help you along, and to have a birth experience that feels good for you, whatever those choices are. The reason I became a doula was because when I was going through my own experiences with pregnancy and birth. And I think it's actually important to talk about some of those experiences. They aren't talked about enough. I did have a couple of miscarriages, and I had, for that reason, with my first pregnancy that resulted in an actual baby with my daughter, it was really complicated emotionally. And I didn't have anybody to help me through those feelings. Obviously, I could talk to my partner and my family, but I wanted somebody who was like, whose job that was, essentially. Mm-hmm. The other thing I really found myself wanting, particularly at the birth, was some Jewish stuff. I'm a rabbi. I like Jewish stuff. And I realized that in all of the books I read about pregnancy and birth and all that stuff, there was nothing there that was about spiritual or cultural stuff you do at a birth. Mm-hmm. And so in the moment of when I was in labor, I was like playing Jewish music and thinking about Jewish stories and all this stuff. And I thought, there needs to be something here. I know that there are a lot of Orthodox women who use doulas because of the laws of Niddah. There are rules about when their husband can no longer touch them. So there's a practice of using a doula to physically assist you in the birth process. And I think that's such a nice idea that you have somebody who's Jewish that can do some Jewish stuff and support. So I decided to become a Jewish doula, maybe for people who aren't Orthodox, although I'm happy to work with Orthodox Jews, but for people who are pregnant, who are wanting some Jewish wisdom, ritual, spiritual stuff. We'll talk about how you can use the mikveh, the ritual bath, in your birth prep or after birth. We can talk all about different things that have happened historically that you may not want if you find that interesting. But essentially, I help people create a Jewish birth plan. I can do that online, so I can do that for people all over the world. I meet with them via Skype or FaceTime or Zoom or whatever, and we can develop the Jewish birth plan, get them lots of DIY resources. Or for people in an area close to where I live, I can actually be their doula at their birth and support their birth in all the ways doulas do with that Jewish dimension.
Right. I can imagine it's hard to be a doula over Skype.
Yes. The actual birth part, right. That's one thing that you need to be in person for.
Right. But I can imagine there's also, it sounds like there's a big educational piece to being a doula as well, and that you can absolutely accomplish online, whether synchronous or asynchronous.
Right. So, exactly.
I have to say, I think the work that you're doing is really remarkable. I think it's going to be eye-opening for a lot of people listening to this show about the diversity of Jewish options out there, and the way you might be hearing that Jewish is. If you don't necessarily connect with that, then know that there are lots of doors. Know that there are lots of doors in, and this is one that's really meaningful to people. And so I'm really happy to share this today. Is there something that you're working on right now that you want to make sure the Jewcurious people out there know about?
Thank you. There is. I'll mention two things. I'm about to put out a guide for people who are blending Christmas and Hanukkah in their homes, Christmaka, as some people call it. And it has lots of personal stories from me, how I do it, and some tips and suggestions, exercises you can do with your family to gear up for a great holiday. And the other thing I'm working on is getting ready for the next launch, the next doors open time for secularsynagogue.com. So we open in cohorts, which means that you can't join at any time of the year. We open 3 times a year. The goal for that is that people really know each other when they join. They get to know each other, and so there aren't new people joining in all the time. So there are certain parts of the year that you can't join at all, but the time to join is coming up. So on November 26th, which is Cyber Monday, it's a great day to join Cyber Synagogue. The door is open. And we'll stay open through Hanukkah, which ends December 10th. And if people are interested, then they go to the secularsynagogue.com website. There will be information there about what we do, who we are, etc. And you should see a pop-up It says, get my free guide, Change the World from the Comfort of Your Couch, which is cool in itself. And if you give me your email address in there, then you'll find out all about how you can join secularsynagogue.com and how we can make sure you have an amazing holiday.
Now, I just want to call out a couple of pieces of wisdom that I heard in there. One is the wisdom of, I'll say, cohorts. I've started a school online and it's sort of open for every people to come in whenever they come in. I can see that the disadvantage of that is that, a bunch of people come in the beginning and then every new person is a new person facing a crowd of a bunch of people who already know each other. Right. And so it's like the new kid in school starting in, November when everybody else has already made friends and kind of paired up and that kind of thing. With this, you get a whole group of new people who are all new at the same time, who are all facing the same kind of anxiety of that at the same time, but then they really bond as a cohort. I think that's really, really smart. And so I love the way you're doing, and maybe put that in the back of my mind for
you can steal it for sure.
The other piece of wisdom here, and you're probably not going to hear a lot of Jewish podcasts endorsing the blending of Hanukkah and Christmas. However, I've always been in communities where that's a reality for many families. And to ignore that reality and to say, okay, we don't talk about that, just kind of erases those families from our thoughts, doesn't give them effective strategies for how do you honor different sides of the family. I want to get this guide myself. I mean, we're a staunchly pro Hanukkah family, but my kids go to their grandparents' house.
Right.
And how do we negotiate that space in a way that's not just negotiated, but really honors the grandparents and brings our kids joy in this context? And so I think that's really amazing that you're putting that resource out for people. And so I'm a fan.
Good.
So
Thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, it's called Creating Chrismica, and it's all about letting go of the December dilemma, as we tend to call it, and making it about December delight.
Excellent. So check that out and get in the loop for this new cohort of what Rabbi Denise is doing. It has been an absolute delight to talk to you, and great to get to know you, great to share you with the Jewcurious people. And thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much. It's been really fun.
Hero, thank you once again for listening to the Jewcurious show. I hope you enjoyed listening to that conversation as much as I enjoyed having that conversation with Rabbi Denise. All the ways that you can connect with her, if you want to connect with her, will be in the show notes to this episode, which will be at jewcurious.show, episode 17. That is, once again, jewcurious.show/ the word episode and the numeral 17. If her approach to Jewish connection appeals to you, if you see yourself as this kind of skeptic who's had a bit of a hard time figuring out where you fit in Judaism based on your mode of thinking, I highly recommend you check out her site. All that is in the show notes. And one last thing, one final reminder, one final invitation. I would love it, Hero, if you would join us in the 30-day Jewish Learning Challenge. That's 30 YouTube videos in 30 days on the subject of Jewish learning. How to get into it, what you do once you're there, and how to upgrade and take it to the next level when you're ready. You can find that at jewcurious.show/learning. It's been a well-balanced treat learning with you today. And until next time, Hero, peace.
Thanks for listening to the Jewcurious Show at www.jewcurious.show.